The case I'm discussing in today's video is one of the most heartbreaking and horrific stories I have ever heard. The victim was a young, bright, beautiful teenage girl. Her life was just beginning when it was cruelly taken by 4 teenage boys whose callous actions and depraved minds shocked Japan and the entire world when the story went public. Welcome to my channel, Weird Wild Stories. My name is Chrissy, and I typically discuss things that are strange, mysterious, and creepy. If that interests you, then please subscribe or follow me. If you enjoy this video, hit the like button, leave me a comment, or share this video with a friend. That really helps out a small channel like mine. Okay, let's go ahead and get into today's story. This is a difficult case to hear, so viewer discretion is advised. The Junko Faruta case is one of the most shocking and horrific crimes in modern history. It's a story of unimaginable cruelty, where a young girl endured 44 days of torment, ultimately losing her life in one of the most brutal ways imaginable. Despite the darkness, it's important to tell her story and remember her as more than just a victim, but as a person whose life was tragically cut short. Junko Faruta was a bright and popular 17-year-old high school student living in Misato, Saitama Prefecture, Japan. She had a promising future ahead of her, working part-time and focusing on her studies. But on November 25, 1988, her life took a terrifying turn. As Junko was riding her bike home from her job, she caught the attention of Hiroshi Miano, a teenage delinquent with ties to the Yakuza, Japan's organized crime syndicate. Miano and his group of friends, Ogura, Shinji Matsumoto, and Yasushi Watanabe, were actively seeking a girl to abduct for their own sick amusement. Miano knocked Junko off her bike and pretended to help her as if he were a good Samaritan, but this was a trap. He led her to an isolated location where his friends were waiting. They kidnapped her and took her to Minato's family home, where they held her captive. What followed over the next 44 days was a nightmare beyond words. Junko was tortured in ways that are unimaginable, as her captors subjected her to repeated physical, emotional, and sexual abuse. They starved her, beat her, and burned her with cigarettes. Her legs were set on fire, her skin was mutilated, and her body was treated like an object. These boys even invited other individuals to join in the abuse. Junko's suffering was relentless, and her pleas for help went unheard. Minato's family, who lived in the same house where she was imprisoned, knew about her presence but chose to remain silent, either out of fear of Miano's Yakuza connections or out of complete indifference. One of the most chilling aspects of this case is how these boys manipulated her into calling her family, convincing them that she had run away and was safe, which prevented any immediate search for her. While Junko was being tortured in unimaginable ways. By January 4th, 1989, Junko's body had endured all it could. She succumbed to her injuries after more than a month of torture. The boys, realizing she was dead, stuffed her body into a 55-gallon drum, filled it with concrete, and disposed of it at a construction site. The crime could have gone unnoticed for longer, but Hiroshi Miano, already under suspicion for unrelated offenses, made a careless confession during a police interrogation. His words opened the door to Junko's discovery and led to the arrests of Miano, Ogura, Minato, and Watanabe. The aftermath of Junko Faruta's case saw her 4 main perpetrators, Hiroshi Miano, Ogura, Shinji Minato, and Yasushi Watanabe, brought to trial. However, what followed left the public in Japan and around the world outraged and frustrated due to what was seen as extremely lenient sentences for the gravity of their crimes. Here's a detailed breakdown of what happened to each of them. 1. Hiroshi Miano, now Hiroshi Yokoyama. As the ringleader of the group, Hiroshi Miano was considered the most responsible for the kidnapping, torture, and eventual death of Junko Faruta. He was 18 years old at the time of the crime, and despite being legally an adult by Japanese standards, he was tried as a juvenile due to laws that allowed for leniency for offenders under the age of 20. This decision alone sparked outrage, as many believed he should have been tried as an adult, given the severity of the crime. Miano was sentenced to 20 years in prison, the maximum sentence for a juvenile in Japan. However, many felt that this was insufficient considering the horrific nature of the crimes he orchestrated. After serving his 20-year sentence, Miano was released from prison in 2009. However, his criminal activity did not end there. In January 2013, Miano was arrested again, this time for fraud. He had allegedly scammed a woman out of millions of yen, though he avoided a significant jail sentence, and the case was eventually settled. Since then, he has changed his surname to Hiroshi Yokoyama in an apparent attempt to avoid the infamy associated with his past, though the shadow of Junko Faruta's case still looms over him. 2. Shinji Minato, formerly Nobuharu Minato. Shinji Minato was 16 years old at the time of the crime, and his family's home was the place where Junko was held captive and tortured for 44 days. His parents and brother, who lived in the house, were reportedly aware of what was happening, but did nothing to intervene. They, too, faced public condemnation for allowing such atrocities to occur under their roof. Minato received an initial sentence of 4 to 6 years in a juvenile detention center. However, after an appeal, his sentence was increased to 5 to 9 years. Like the others, he was treated as a juvenile despite the horrific crimes committed. After serving his sentence, Minato was released. But like Miyano, he found himself in legal trouble again. In 2018, Minato was rearrested for attempted murder after beating a man with a metal rod and slashing his throat. This incident further angered the public, reinforcing the belief that the perpetrators had not been adequately punished and had learned nothing from their time in prison. 3. Joe Ogura. Joe Ogura, who was 17 at the time of the crime, was another one of the main participants in Junko's torture and abuse. He had a reputation for being particularly violent and cruel during her captivity, and like the others, he too received a relatively light sentence. Ogura was sentenced to 8 years in a juvenile detention center. He was released after serving his full term. Ogura's life post-release has been similarly marred by violence and criminal activity. After leaving detention, he reportedly boasted about his involvement in Junko's murder. He continued to live a delinquent lifestyle, associating with gangs and engaging in further criminal acts. At one point, Ogura was arrested again for assaulting a man he believed was dating his girlfriend. In addition to his violent tendencies, reports suggest that Ogura continued to intimidate and harass Junko's family, further adding to the pain and suffering they had to endure. 4. Yasushi Watanabe. Yasushi Watanabe, who was 17 at the time, played a lesser but still significant role in Junko's torture and eventual murder. Like the other perpetrators, he received a lenient sentence compared to the severity of the crimes. Watanabe was sentenced to 3 to 4 years in juvenile detention. His sentence was also extended after an appeal, and he eventually served about 5 to 7 years in total. Watanabe's life after his release has been quieter than the other perpetrators, and less is known about his activities. Unlike Miyano, Ogura, and Minato, Watanabe hasn't been reported to have committed further criminal acts after his release. But the general lack of public information about him has kept him largely out of the spotlight. The lenient sentences handed down to these 4 individuals provoked a national outcry in Japan. Many people, both in Japan and internationally, believed the sentences were far too short given the brutal and prolonged nature of the crime. One major factor contributing to the perceived leniency was Japan's legal system at the time, which had laws in place to protect juvenile offenders, even when the crimes were as severe as those committed against Junko Faruta. The public's reaction to this case sparked conversations about juvenile law reform, with many calling for harsher punishments for serious crimes committed by juveniles. There were also criticisms of the way the media handled the case. Initially, the boys' identities were kept anonymous due to their status as minors. However, several Japanese tabloids eventually revealed their names and personal details, arguing that the severity of their crime warranted public exposure. Junko Faruta's family suffered unimaginable grief and devastation in the aftermath of her murder. Not only did they lose their daughter in such a violent and prolonged manner, but they also had to endure the media circus and the lenient sentences given to her murderers. It's been reported that Junko's mother collapsed during the trial from the sheer emotional weight of hearing the details of her daughter's suffering. After the trials, Junko's family sued the parents of Shinji Minato, arguing that they had been complicit in allowing their home to be used for her captivity. They won a small settlement, but no amount of money could ever ease the pain they endured. The case of Junko Faruta remains one of the most shocking and heartbreaking crimes in modern Japanese history. The cruelty of her captors, the injustice of their light sentences, and the lasting pain it caused her family have left a scar on the public consciousness. Junko's story has lived on, not just as a dark chapter in Japan's history, but as a symbol of the need for better protections, justice for victims, and vigilance against evil. Her name is remembered by many who honor her life, and the unimaginable courage she displayed in the face of such horrific circumstances. Junko Faruta should be remembered not just for her tragic death, but for the life she had, and the light that was stolen from the world. Thank you for watching. Until next time, stay safe and stay curious.